And I give the call to the Shadow Attorney-General.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Tomorrow we will mark 50 years since the passage of the Racial Discrimination Act 1975, a landmark in Australia's legal and moral commitment to equality. It was a bold step forward, but one that was supported by the coalition in opposition. The Racial Discrimination Act laid the foundation for a more inclusive Australia. The Act outlawed racial discrimination in public life, employment, housing, services and education. It was our first federal human rights law, aligning Australia with the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. It was a repudiation of the White Australia policy, which had effectively been dismantled by Coalition Prime Minister Harold Holt in 1966. The Act was a declaration that every Australian, regardless of race or background, deserves dignity and respect. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Coalition over the decades has supported and strengthened this Act. From the Fraser, Howard, Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison governments, the Liberal and National parties have been committed to multiculturalism. Whether in government or opposition, the Liberal and National parties have consistently championed the values of fairness, tolerance and unity. The Coalition has supported the Australian Human Rights Commission, while ensuring it must remain accountable and effective. There is, however, more work to do in this regard, and we have always believed that the fight against racism must be matched by a defence of freedom of expression, the rule of law and social cohesion. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Racial Discrimination Act has delivered real benefits. It has empowered victims of racism to seek justice. It has promoted education and conciliation over punishment. It has helped build one of the most successful multicultural societies in the world. It has protected Indigenous Australians, migrants and religious minorities from systemic exclusion. But it has also faced challenges. Enforcement remains inconsistent. Many complaints never reach resolution. Rather than closing the gap for our Indigenous people, many of these targets are not on track and some are even worsening. Of the 19 socio-economic targets, only 4 are currently on track. The Act has not always kept pace with the evolving nature of racism, especially what we see online. And tragically, in recent times, it has failed to protect one of Australia's oldest and most vulnerable communities, the Jewish community. The Australian Human Rights Commission has failed dismally to protect Jewish Australians on our university campuses, in our workplaces, in our public spaces and even in their homes. Madam Deputy Speaker, since October 7, 2023, when Hamas launched its brutal attack on Israel, we have witnessed an unprecedented surge in anti-Semitism across Australia. According to the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, there were 2,062 incidents of anti-Semitism in the year following the attack. That is a 316% increase from the previous year. This is not just a failure of law enforcement, it is a failure of moral leadership. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Labor government has been slow to respond, reluctant to condemn and hesitant to act. While the Prime Minister has made statements, the Jewish community continues to feel unsafe, unheard and unprotected. Madam Deputy Speaker, Australian Jews tell me that they no longer feel safe wearing clothing or jewellery which would identify them as Jewish for fear of reprisals. Others have told me that they are considering moving to Israel because they would feel safer there. I've spoken with an Australian Jewish family who in 2024 were actually in the process of leaving Australia permanently to seek refuge in Israel. I find that incredibly sad. That is an indictment on all of us that one of our own, an Australian family, feels that they have to move from our shores to seek refuge. I have even had Jewish Australians tell me that for the first time in their lives, they are putting in place or considering putting in place a plan B, in inverted commas. That is, a plan on how to get out of Australia in the event that anti-Semitism became so bad that the lives of their families were in jeopardy. This is not Nazi-occupied Europe. This is Australia in 2025. The same country that supported the establishment of the State of Israel under the leadership of Australia's External Affairs Minister, Labor luminary Doc Evatt. How did it get to this? Madam Deputy Speaker, Edmund Burke is said to have coined the phrase, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." This immense feeling of a lack of safety and insecurity experienced by many members of the Jewish community in Australia was not ameliorated by the announcement made by the Director-General of Security on the 26th of August this year. That was that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, had committed at least 2 acts of terror on Australian soil using local criminal intermediaries. The first was the firebombing of the kosher Lewis Continental Kitchen in Sydney and the arson attack of the Adass Israel Synagogue in Melbourne, both in 2024. For more than 2 years, the Coalition asked this government to list the IRGC as a terrorist organisation under the Criminal Code. For more than 2 years, this government refused. It dithered. It delayed. It said it couldn't be done. The Coalition offered to support reasonable amendments to the Criminal Code to enable the government to list the IRGC, and yet it sat on its hands until the Director-General of Security announced that the IRGC had, through its intermediaries, committed acts of terrorism on Australian soil. The Coalition is pleased, very pleased, that the Parliament has passed the Criminal Code Amendment State Sponsors of Terrorism Bill through the House on Tuesday, and it looks forward to passing it through the Senate. And ultimately, the Coalition looks forward to the IRGC being listed as a state sponsor of terrorism as soon as practicable. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Special Envoy to Combat Anti-Semitism, Gillian Segal, appointed by Labor, has acknowledged that Jewish Australians feel very unsafe and that anti-Semitism is at a tipping point. Yet, her recommendations, cutting funding to universities that fail to protect Jewish students, screening visa applicants for extremism and strengthening hate laws, have not been meaningfully implemented. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not about Israel. It is about Australian Jews, our neighbours, our colleagues, our friends being vilified, excluded and attacked in their own country. The Racial Discrimination Act was meant to protect them, but largely it has not. And the Labor government must be held accountable for its failure to uphold the spirit and the letter of the law. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Coalition stands ready to act. We call for immediate funding for community security groups protecting Jewish institutions. We call for stronger enforcement of anti-vilification laws. We call for a judicial inquiry into anti-Semitism on university campuses and the stripping of funding from universities and cultural institutions that fail to address anti-Semitism. We call for clear guidelines for universities to protect Jewish students and staff. We call for support for Holocaust education and anti-racism in programs in schools. We call for a national strategy to combat anti-Semitism developed in consultation with Jewish leaders. Madam Deputy Speaker, despite these stresses and strains, Australia remains a beacon of multicultural success. We cannot allow our nation to be dictated to or our social fabric be torn apart by a very small number of people who seek to sow discord. The Australian society is inclusive and welcoming. If the United States is the land of the free, Australia is the land of the fair go. We intrinsically believe that people should be treated equally in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of each other, whether you've been a citizen for 5 minutes or you're an Indigenous person whose family has been here for 50,000 years. Former Prime Minister Tony Abbott once said, "Two of the greatest lotteries in life are the country in which you are born and the family in which you are born into." And I believe he is absolutely right. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are home to vibrant communities from Greek, Italian and Lebanese Australians who help build our cities and our industries, from Chinese, Indian and Vietnamese Australians who've enriched our economy and our culture, from the Sudanese, Afghan and Syrian Australians who found refuge and opportunity here, from Jewish Australians whose contributions to law, medicine, education and philanthropy are immeasurable. Multiculturalism has added billions to our gross domestic product, strengthened our global ties and made our society more resilient and dynamic. The Coalition has long supported multiculturalism, not as a slogan, but as a policy framework that promotes integration, mutual respect and national unity. Education is key to combating racism. The Coalition in government has invested in programs that teach tolerance, celebrate diversity and promote civic engagement. We support initiatives that encourage interfaith dialogue, promote language preservation and cultural heritage. We've supported community leaders in building bridges across ethnic divides. We must also ensure that young Australians, especially those from migrant and refugee backgrounds, feel valued, supported and empowered to contribute to our national story. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we commemorate 50 years of the Racial Discrimination Act, let us renew its promise. Let us recommit to a nation where no one is judged by the colour of their skin or the origin of their name. Let us commit to freedom of speech, that it is protected but never used as a weapon of hate. Let us commit to closing the many gaps for our Indigenous Australians. Let us commit to multiculturalism, that it be celebrated, not politicised. And let us commit that every community, especially those under threat, is defended with courage and conviction. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Racial Discrimination Act is not just a law, it is a moral compass. Let us ensure that it continues to point us toward justice, unity and peace, and I thank the House.
Authorised by Andrew Wallace, LNP, Boccarina, Queensland.